Hi guys, and welcome back to IamKareno. So this is going to be my pregnancy video, and I'm probably going to divide it into two parts, so be sure to check the link below for the second part in case this ends up becoming a bit too long. I'm filming this one day before my planned C-section, so I'm kind of nervous. The baby is obviously still inside, but by this time tomorrow it's all going to be over, and I can't believe it's going to be the end of such a long journey and the start of a different one. I actually have a story of the birth saved as one of my highlights, so if you want to check that out, then be sure to follow my Instagram account at IamKareno. So the baby is a girl and her name is Isabelle, and she's obviously named after my favorite character in Animal Crossing, and it's been my favorite baby name in my head for years and years. And the funny thing is that this year is actually the Chinese Year of the Dog, which fits even better because Isabelle is a small poodle. So in this video, I promise to answer all of your questions about the pregnancy and birth and the time before the pregnancy, and I've also linked everything in the comment box below so you can easily jump to a certain part of the video if there's something that interests you. So the reason I didn't talk about this pregnancy was because I actually had 2 miscarriages 2 years ago. And back then I didn't announce those on social media at all because it just felt too hurtful to talk about before I knew what the future was going to be. So what happened was that I obviously got pregnant again this year. I was really looking forward to the 3-month, 12-week scan because I thought, if that was fine, then I can start telling everyone, I can post it on social media. But unfortunately, the pregnancy itself ended up being more complicated than me or my husband thought it would be. And we never actually had a point where we could tell people, yay, that we have a baby and it's gonna be great. Like we literally told our closest friends and family, and we had to say stuff like, we're pregnant, but there's a risk of this and this happening, and we have to go to lots of checkups, and we'll only know for sure after 24 weeks if everything's okay. It was like you're telling people, but with a disclaimer that something could go wrong, and it sort of takes a lot of the excitement away from an announcement. And for that reason, I obviously just didn't want to bring that onto social media as well, because you're opening it up to even more people. It was literally until the very end. It was third trimester, I think, like at 32 weeks. Like after 32 weeks was the time when I really enjoyed this pregnancy, because that's when I realized, okay, we're so far in that everything's in control and there's very little chance that something could go wrong. Okay, so we're back, and I'm filming this 5 weeks after Isabelle was born. I completely underestimated how much work it was going to be taking care of a newborn, and I wasn't able to do any filming or editing the first couple of weeks. As you can see, my hair is a mess, my clothes are just whatever. You can see all my painkillers in the back there. But I'm finally getting the hang of things. So Isabelle is taking a nap right now, and I'm going to try finish filming this video. So I'll start from the very beginning, which is 2016. That was the year where I had 2 miscarriages, and the first one happened very early, around 5 weeks. And it was basically, I took a pregnancy test, it was positive, and I ended up getting my period 2 days later. So even though I was upset about that one, it didn't affect me that much because it was basically over before it began. Later that year, I got pregnant again, and I was much happier because I felt ready for it, and I thought, this is the baby that's supposed to be for us. With that pregnancy, I was much further along and had a lot more symptoms, but one of the things that bothered me was that I had constant spotting for about 2 weeks, and it just didn't really go away. I remember watching a video from BBXO, who is another YouTuber, where she was talking about her pregnancy. She had the same thing, and she ended up having to go to hospital to have it checked out to make sure it wasn't an ectopic pregnancy. So I decided that just to be safe, maybe I should go to my doctor and have it checked out, just make sure everything's okay. So I went in at around 6.5 weeks, and I really wasn't expecting much because back then I didn't know anything about pregnancy. So she kind of scanned me, and then she turned on the monitor, and all of a sudden there was just like a heartbeat on screen. I could hear it, and I could actually see it in the ultrasound as well. And it was just the craziest feeling because I didn't even know that babies had heartbeats that early. All she said was, congratulations, you're pregnant, everything looks good, and that she couldn't find a reason for the bleeding, but it's just one of those things that often happens, and by that time it was already going away on its own. So I went home that day and I was completely overwhelmed by the experience. We were so excited that we decided to tell friends and family, even though it was before 12 weeks, but the reason was, you often hear people say if there's a heartbeat, then the chances of miscarriage go down dramatically. So there's a 95-98% chance that the baby's going to be fine anyway, and I thought, why not just share this with everyone? I actually had really bad symptoms in that pregnancy very early on, so I wasn't able to work and all I did was stay at home, and I just thought, I need to make it until 12 weeks and I should be feeling better. Unfortunately, about 10 weeks into that pregnancy, I started to get some spotting again. I was a bit worried, but you also often hear this happening in perfectly normal pregnancies. However, I decided to go and have that checked out. I went back to the same doctor, and I remember that she wasn't at all concerned. Like, she says, yeah, I'm sure it's nothing, just come in and let's take a look at the baby. But as soon as she turned on the machine, I could tell from her face that something wasn't right. The screen looked completely different. The first time I was there, you could see the heartbeat and you could hear it, but this time there was just nothing. And I knew right away what happened, and she also said, unfortunately, she couldn't find a heartbeat. And it actually looked like that the baby stopped developing at 7.5 weeks. And for some reason, my body only realized this at 10.5 weeks. Then she told me that I have a couple of options. I could either wait for the miscarriage to happen on its own, or I could go to hospital and have an operation or take tablets to speed up the process. At that point, in my head, I just sort of wanted everything to be over as soon as possible, so I said, I'd rather get the operation, and she gave me all the details to the nearest hospital. When I was at the hospital, I had to wait around a bit, and I got checked again from 2 different doctors there because they need an absolute confirmation that the baby has indeed passed away before they can actually perform the procedure. All of this happened on a Friday, and they scheduled me for the week after, Tuesday or Wednesday. I was allowed to go home over the weekend in between, and part of me really hoped that the miscarriage might happen on its own during that time. As it turned out, that's exactly what happened. I went home and I started getting stronger and stronger cramps, and then the miscarriage just happened on its own about 2 days later. The only silver lining to everything was that physically, it really wasn't as bad as I expected. It's painful emotionally, but the physical side is different for every person. In my case, I recovered physically very quickly, and I was working the same week and life just went back to normal. However, as many of you might know, as soon as you've had 1 or more miscarriages, it really spoils the experience of a future pregnancy. It's not a case that once you get pregnant again, it makes everything go away. It's actually the opposite, because once you get pregnant again, your anxiety just gets even bigger. You're constantly thinking, what if this one goes wrong again? Do I even have the mental energy to cope with a 3rd miscarriage? And the pregnancy is so long. It's not just the first trimester, there's a 2nd, there's a 3rd. You're scared every single step of the way. So when I did get pregnant again earlier this year, I was actually a bit unprepared by my own anxiety throughout the first trimester. All I did was just lie around on the sofa thinking, I have no control over anything, maybe it'll go wrong, maybe you'll be okay, but it was just very, very hard to deal with mentally. If you've watched my Draw My Life video, then you'll also know that I was diagnosed with lupus about 8 years ago. Lupus is an autoimmune illness that causes all kinds of complications, many of which happen in pregnancy. So I had that in the back of my head as well, and I knew that it was going to be harder for me to stay pregnant than a lot of other women. So I decided to switch doctors, and I was lucky. Okay, so Isabelle is waking up from her nap right now, and I can show you guys her very quickly. Hi. 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 Say hi to YouTube. Hi, Isabelle. It's your first YouTube video. Say hi. Oh, no, you're... Oh god, now she's going purple. Now she wants to eat something. Okay, I'll be right back. There are two main types of risks with lupus pregnancies. The first one are blood clotting disorders, such as anti-phospholipid syndrome, which means that your blood can clot randomly at any time, and if this happens in the placenta, then it could cause miscarriage or stillbirth at any point in the pregnancy. The second one is congenital heart block, which means the electrical signals inside the heart don't work properly, and most babies end up needing a pacemaker, or in worst cases, it can also lead to death. So once I had my pregnancy confirmed, I ended up having to do tons of tests to find out what kind of risk factors I had. The results came back around the same time as my 12-week scan. Fortunately, I didn't have any of the blood clotting disorders, which meant that I was able to stop giving myself blood thinning injections every day. But the bad news was I did have a lot of anti-RO or SSA antibodies, which is what could cause congenital heart block. As a result, they wanted to monitor me very closely from week 16 to 24 of pregnancy. This is the time when the baby's heart is developing, and these antibodies are one of the very few ones that cross the placenta into the baby's bloodstream. Once they're there, they have a tendency to attack the AV node, which then affects the electrical signals and can cause the heartbeat to slow down or stop completely. So this came as quite a shock to me because I wasn't even aware that lupus could cause heart problems. I was originally so happy to have reached the 3-month mark, and then all of a sudden I'm faced with this heart problem, which meant that I can't even relax until the 24-week mark. Going to all these checkups was just really stressful, and it was a very, very long time period. I think if anyone has had a blood test, or if you've had any sort of medical test, and they say, we'll give you the results next week, you know that that's the longest week of your life. You feel like the time just stretches out so much, and then once you get the results, most of the case it's good news and you're so relieved and can get on with your life. In my case, it was that experience stretched over 10 weeks, which is a really long time. This was over summer, and I think many of you might have noticed that I wasn't very active on YouTube. I made videos on IamKareno, which was very helpful in keeping me distracted, but I wasn't able to produce that much work because I was just mentally really stressed, and that's the reason why I didn't end up uploading two life hacks for a very long time. So after all that, it turns out her heart was completely fine. 24 weeks came and went, and they didn't find any problems, and I was so relieved. I don't think I've ever been happier in my life than that point when they told me it's over, it's fine. So after 24 weeks, I thought I can finally relax and enjoy the pregnancy. But that was exactly the time when all pregnant women have to take a glucose tolerance test. So I have never had any problems in my life with diabetes or food or kind of my metabolism or my weight, and honestly it was the last thing on my mind when I went in to take that test. I thought it's just a routine test, I'm glad it's over with. I didn't even react to that glucose drink. I felt completely normal throughout the test. So I was so shocked when my doctor called me a week later and he just said, well, you actually have gestational diabetes. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, what is going on? Like, why is this pregnancy so complicated? So gestational diabetes is actually quite common. 9% of pregnant women get it, and it's actually related to hormones. It has nothing to do with your weight. It has nothing to do with sort of typical risk factors of diabetes. I'm sure lots of you watching this video might have gone through it, so you know what I'm talking about, but it doesn't make it any less of a hassle. After I was diagnosed with diabetes, I had to go back to hospital to get a blood sugar testing kit plus a food diary, and I had to test my blood 4 times a day. I had to write down all the numbers. I had to be very careful with what I eat to make sure that the numbers stay below a certain level. I ended up completely changing my eating habits in the 3rd trimester, and I managed to keep the diabetes under control with diet and exercise. But needless to say, this just kind of added another layer of complication on a pregnancy that was already kind of complicated. So when it came to choosing birth options, I decided to go for an elective cesarean because by that point I was just so tired of all these health issues, and I just wanted my baby to be here as quickly and as safely as possible. I'm going to put my birth story in a separate video, so if you want to watch that, then be sure to click the link up here. So that was my pregnancy story, and I've added a lot more details in the text below, so if you're interested in all the medical terminology, then be sure to check it out. I hope you enjoyed this update, and thank you so much for your patience because I'm trying my best to get my video schedule back on track. I'm Joanna, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!